Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Canal Days. As always, I'm your host Carrie, along with my co-host, founder of Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. Our Canal Days series delves into the vast collection of historical sites throughout Massachusetts, with Robert's expertise of the local history as our personal guide. Each episode, we uncover history throughout local communities, highlighting historic landmarks and uncovering their seminal significance. Today's episode of Canal Days, we'll be discussing and learning about the Sikes Cemetery, located in Ludlow, Massachusetts. So, when created in 1772, Benjamin Sikes gifted the land as Ludlow's first burial ground. Can you define why this gift was historically significant for early settlers and how it reflected the town's transition from Springfield to its own settlement?
Well, Ludlow really was a separate district until 1774, and it wasn't a town until 1775. And if there's pioneers in the community, they will want to have their own cemeteries. And this is very typical in Massachusetts. Pioneers come over, some start to die, and they need a cemetery. But in the very early years, they were able to use the old Springfield burial ground for a few years. But around, at some point, Benjamin Sikes thought it was great to hand over some of the land, and what a nice gesture that was. And it's still available. It's still a place you can go to, even though it's on a extreme side street. It's around 244 Monkston Street, opposite that address. And the pioneers would use this from the settlement time, about 1772 is probably the first burial, until just past when they became a town in 1775. So for a few years, this was the only cemetery within Ludlow itself. And then finally, the cemetery called the Fuller Cemetery was gifted also to Ludlow, and that one started getting used, and that one was much closer to the center.
And the cemetery was originally called the Center Cemetery and later the Old Center Cemetery. So, can you acquaint us with what this evolution of names tells us about the growth of Ludlow and establishment of other burial grounds in town?
Yes, it has the people shifted ever so slightly, like a quarter mile more towards the southeast of Ludlow. There was need to have a burial ground near the area that the people would be in. And so that's when the Fuller Cemetery came around. And that's where the new cemetery, the third one along, that area, which was called the Center Cemetery, that one came in. So the Benjamin Sikes Cemetery wasn't as needed as much, and it lost its original name as Center Cemetery or Old Center. And from that point, it wasn't heavily used anymore after that. So it was used a lot in the very beginning, around 1770s, and then into the 1780s and 90s, and then very early 1800s, only the first decade. But after that, nothing happened anymore because the population was shifted around. And Ludlow Center is now around the area of the green. And that green is where you have the Fuller Cemetery, the meeting house, and you had the very old church in that area too. So that became much more like a center of a true town in Massachusetts.
And stick around, we'll be right back after this short announcement. Are you fascinated by local history and eager to investigate the obscure treasures off the beaten path throughout the state of Massachusetts? Or maybe just seeking an unforgettable cultural activity for family and friends to enjoy? Look no further than Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, founded by Robert Como. With over a decade of experience, Robert offers captivating tours and presentations of historic sites and landmarks throughout the state. Whether you're interested in canals, cemeteries, charming churches, or more, Robert's Tours provide a unique and enriching experience for all. And that's not it. You can also schedule private tours tailored to your interests, ensuring a personalized adventure and unforgettable memories. Perfect for families or groups of all sizes, making for an exciting hands-on learning experience that brings history to life. Simply visit holyokecanaltour.org or email bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com to book your private tour today. So, getting back to our episode on the Sikes Cemetery of Ludlow, Massachusetts. A fence was placed around this cemetery in 1782 and a stone wall in 1865. What do these changes reveal about how the community valued and protected this site over time?
Well, the wooden fence came very early on, only about 10 years after the cemetery was open. And that's starting to show that maybe there were farm animals from that area drifting into the cemetery and getting up close to the barrels or close up to the stones. Sure, cows would eat the grass, and that would be good, I guess, but you wanted to have a little area of respect. And so the first one, the wooden fence, was probably just that to show that it was a respected area. And then after that, that was good enough until the stone wall came around, 1865, and that is still in place. So even 160 years later, you have that same stone wall there, and the wooden fence has probably fallen down. And Ludlow probably wanted to revere this original pioneer cemetery even more. They realized it was very precious. Very few towns around Massachusetts have pioneer cemeteries, especially one that stopped being having burials come into it. And they probably were proud of that fact, and they probably wanted to make it more separate of a look. And so a nice stone wall around it was put in. Probably the field stones were found on farms nearby, and they were put in place.
And several members of the Sikes family, including Benjamin Sikes himself, are buried here. Could you enlighten us a bit about the Sikes family's role in Ludlow's early history and why their legacy is still remembered today?
They were one of the first pioneers of Ludlow, and there were a few others, so it's important to honor those pioneers. And this is almost to the point that this is exactly what this place is all about. All right, there's other names, of course, around Ludlow, but this one really catches it. So, for instance, there's Anna Sikes, 1776, and another Anna Sikes, 1772. Those are very early burials. Now, they used to, pre-Revolutionary War, put the body so it was on an east-west axis, and if the upper torso could rise up, it faced towards the west. Then they put the headstone at the head of the person, facing towards the east, and the footstone at the feet of the person, facing towards the west. And some of the stones still face that correct direction for the headstone, but not for the footstone. And then after the Revolutionary War, you started having burials taking place 180 degrees in the other direction. So they had stone to face inscription towards the west, and the footstones inscription towards the east. And for instance, Benjamin Sikes, when he died in 1781, would have been buried in that direction. The same with Hannah Sikes. Now, there is one burial in the very back of the cemetery that we're going to talk about. Right, mention her. Now, also in the cemetery are really cool stones. There's one that's very worn out, called Maria Sikes, 1778. But there's a dolly stone where you can tell that it was hand carved by a person that was amateur, because the inscription is not in straight lines like a normal carver would do. So Dolly, probably Sikes, 1776. Now, in the very back of the cemetery, there's a Smith Chapin, and she's the only burial that's not in the grouping towards the middle right. There's probably about 20 burials with inscribed gravestones. And I would guess there's about 20 other without gravestones, including children's and paupers and ones that stones are worn out. But there is a submit chapin in the very back of the graveyard, and that's where Submit, she was a young child, born in 1775, died in 1776. She was 1 year old and 2 months. And it's hard to tell how she's related to the Sikes family. Maybe some of the Chapins, which is a very, very common name around Hampton County, had come into Ludlow, and as a child she died there. Maybe she got buried in the back because she was a child. The child and paupers usually go in the back. Maybe the stone came later when the family got some money, and that's why there's a stone back. A section was mostly children and paupers only. So it's a very quaint, nice, and somewhat hard to understand cemetery because it's mostly empty. About 80% of it has no burials at all. So could it be used ever again? Maybe.
And thank you for joining us for our episode on the Sikes Cemetery of Ludlow, Massachusetts, and joining us on our journey through the rich history of the Connecticut River Valley. We hope you enjoyed uncovering some of the hidden and overlooked marvels and their fascinating stories that shaped our past in the state of Massachusetts. A special thanks to Robert Camus, founder of Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, for sharing his passion and expertise with us. Remember, you can find more information about Robert's tours, book private tours, and explore the Canal Days video and podcast series at holyokecanaltour.org. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please like, comment, and share. We'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions for future episodes. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to tune into our next episode of Canal Days. Until next time.